Begin the current Daf, Masechta Nazir Daf, Mem Dal. Begin 12 lines down at the top of the Amud. We were going to continue with the next Mishnah, continuing on actually the same words that are the title of this parak of Shleisha Minin, where the Mishnah goes through, and the Gemara is actually going to elaborate on this, a contrast of all these three different prohibitions that the Nazir has, of the Tumah and the Teklachas and the Yitzim Negefen, regarding a stringency that each one has over the other ones. Turning to today's Daf. Some ideas we're going to discuss in today's Daf are Shleisha Min Nasur Nazir. Like we said, there's three types of things that are forbidden by Nazir, and the Mishnah is going to contrast them, what the stringencies of each one is in regards to the other one. The Mishnah on Amid Beis discusses Teklachas Tumah, regarding the hair cutting when it becomes tummy, regarding if he brings his karbanis on the 8th day, what do you do then? Because what happens if you're supposed to cut the hair on the 7th day, and then go ahead and bring the karbanis on the 8th day? The Mishnah is going to have a machlekes, if he cut his hair on the 8th day, what's going to be the halacha regarding bringing the karbanis on the 9th day, or is that also going to still be on the 8th day? Which that gets us into a whole discussion regarding Bias Mikdash, regarding coming into the Beis HaMikdash, regarding what areas is a tummy person allowed to come into, what type of tumah, which that really is related to the halacha of Shalish Machanes, where there's three different machanes. There is the Yerushalayim, which has a halacha of Machane Yisrael, and then there was the Harabayis itself, which Harabayis had the halacha of Machane Leviyah, and then actually specifically the Sha'ar Nikanor is going to come up in the Gemara's discussion, because some individuals have to be Lefnei Hashem. The problem is Lefnei Hashem, the Azara has, again, when we say Azara, depends what we mean, as this Yisrael, not the as this Nashim, which is on the outside. So the Beis HaMikdash, obviously the Heichel, has the halachas of the Machne Shechina, and there's different types of tumas that are sent out of different types of machnes. So the Azar itself has halacha of Machne Shechina, it's the highest level of Kedusha. The Harabayis, the Temple Mount, the halacha of Machne Leviyah, it's a lower level of degree of Kedusha. And the Mitzayra is sent out of Yerushalayim, but all other, and it has Kedusha itself. You have to eat your shlam over there, kachim kalm over there, and then the more severe the Kedusha, the more tumas start getting sent out. And we're going to see as it relates to our Gemara's discussion regarding certain tumas, that he's by the Sha'ar Nikanor, where he has to be Lefnei Hashem, but he can't be in the Machne Shechina itself, regarding where the person could be and which people could be and which cannot be. Which some of the tumas that we're going to discuss are ziva, which a ziva is that there's a genital discharge, which depending if it's 2 days or it's 3 days, 2 days is going to be tumah. There's a difference between male and female, and 3 days when then you have to have a carbon. And also regarding Tful Yom Mechutz Kippurim, when you're starting to purify yourself, there's also stages. Tful Yom is that you table that day, but you didn't have yet Harav Shemesh, sundown, to be totally pure. Mechutz Kippurim is something, an added thing, which is you even had Harav Shemesh, but you didn't yet bring your carbon of the following day. Many tumas, if you tumah for 7 days, and then you have to go out and bring your carbon the following day. So you're still lacking, but you're not as lacking. The Gemara is going to discuss this chilukim in regarding to those types of tumas. So begin the current Daf Mem Dalid, 12 lines down at the top of the Amud. We continue with the next Mishnah on this theme of our parak regarding Shleisha Min Nasur B'Nazir. As we already said this in the beginning of the parak, there's three types of things that are forbidden by Nazir. They are Hatumah, regarding the prohibition of becoming tummy, Vateklachas, the prohibition of cutting off your hair, Vayitzim Negefen, and the derivatives of the grapevine are prohibited to be ingested by the Nazir. Now the Mishnah contrasts them. It's a very technical discussion going through the whole Gemara about this contrast. So there's a stringency that you have by the Isra of Tumah and by the hair cutting, more than which is the prohibition of him drinking wine. Why? The halacha is Tumah v'Teklachas, those two prohibitions, the halacha is Seisrin, which Tumah, explicitly the pasuk says, we all know if the Nazir becomes tummy, he has to start all over, it's Seisr. Teklachas is Seisr 30 days, as the Gemara says later on, because you need to have a growth of hair to cut off when you do your ceremony to finish your Naziris. So there is also a stira of 30 days when you cut the hair. However, as the Gemara is going to explicitly bring a miyut, if you drink wine, it's not Seisr the days that you counted up until now. That's one contrast. Another one. Now the same thing goes the other way around. There's a stringency of that of drinking the wine, a wine derivative, more than what you have by tumah and the hair cutting. Why? That's a stringency. Regarding the prohibition of drinking wine, there is no exception to this law. You can't say, let's say you have to make kiddush or avdallah, that a yain mitzvah will be like a yain rishus, where the example is of, let's say he swears that he's going to drink wine, which is a shvuah, a mitzvah, and then he takes a neder of Nazir, he's forbidden to partake of wine. So it's not hut machlol, there's no exception to the klal. Whereas with tumah v'teglachas, hut machlolon, they're not as stringent, the other two halachas. They do have permissions from the category. Where do you see? So you have b'teglachas mitzvah. A haircutting was permitted for a nazir if he's a mitzayra, as the Gemara says later on from the word reishai, where you see that there is an exemption to the law. He's allowed to do a haircutting, this nazir if he's a mitzayra, and the b'meis mitzvah. If tumah is permitted when there's someone who has no one to bury him, he's allowed to make himself tamei. So you see that tumah and teglachas are not as stringent in that regard like yitzim nagefen. Continues the Mishnah, another contrast. You have a stringency that you have for the tumah and by the hair cutting, meaning than the hair cutting. Meaning, although we said that they're both seiser, but still tumah is more stringent than the hair cutting. Tumah seseches is akol, because when someone becomes tamei, I don't care if he counted 500 days. If he had a nazir of 600 days, it knocks off everything. It has to start all the way over. And carbon, there's a liability of a carbon that you're doing when you're purifying yourself. Whereas v'teklachas, if let's say they had his hair cut, in the seis of the shleishim, it only takes away 30 days, because as we said, the whole purpose is that you have to have 30 days when you are doing your ceremony. So if you counted 500 days, well, and your nazir it was supposed to end tomorrow, it's going to knock off 30 days because you have to have some hair when you finish, but it's not seis the whole thing. And carbon, there's no liability of a carbon. That's only by tumah that you have a cup of carbon. So although they're both seiser, but there's still tumah is still more chomer than that of the taklachas. Now the Gemara tells us that a whole bunch of different questions that we really could have learned a kabel chaimer for one from the other. And the Gemara is going to quote psukim that tells us that no reason why all these categories have their own halachas of why they are the way they are. So the Gemara says it in a way of question and answer. Says the Gemara, wait a second. V'tumah loy tuta mechlala. You told me that tumah is huter mechlala. There's an exception to the rule that you're allowed to be metamid to a meis mitzvah. So therefore it's not as stringent like we said of hayitzim legefen. Says the Gemara, why? V'tumah loy tuta mechlala. You should not allow it to be permitted from its category. Kavachem miyayin. What's the kavachem from wine? Uma yayin, if you find by wine, shein is iser. It's not such a chamadege iser. If you drink wine, you didn't lose the days you counted in the zizah until now. And still, there's no exception to the rule. You're never allowed to drink wine as a nazir, not even for dvar mitzvah. So tumah that's more chamer, that it knocks away whatever you did if you become tamei. Isn't it a kabel chaimer that it should not be permitted from the category of the iser? So this is how all these, we're going to do a bunch of these. That's how the Gemara is going to go them all. It's to say kabel chaimer. It's going to bring a pasuk. No, it says in the pasuk, la'aviv u'le'ima lo yitama. To his father and his mother should not become tamei. So the Rosh says that's an extra pasuk because it already said al kol nafshes meis lo yavai. So why would you tell me that la'aviv u'le'ima lo yitama? Of course, you said everyone you're not being tamei. So it's coming to make a diuk. To tell me la'aviv u'le'ima lo yitama. Yeah, to even his close relative, his father and mother, not come to tell me al matama l'meis mitzvah, which is more of a requirement than your father and your mother. Why would you say father and mother? They're including old relatives, old dead people. To tell me, but l'meis mitzvah. So therefore, it's a pasuk that's telling me that there's a hut machlala by tumah that from mes mitzvah you can make yourself tamei. So now the Gemara asks the other way around. It says, okay, but yayin yuta machlali. We should say that wine should be permitted from its categorical iser. For example, let's say someone swore, I'm going to drink wine, which he has a chiv of a shvuah. So therefore, it should be permitted kabel chaimer tumah, a kabel chaimer from tamei. What's the kabel chaimer? Because which it's a chamer de gezach, it's seis or whatever you had counted up until that point, you became tamei. Yet hutu machlal, it's permitted from its category. So yayin she'ein is seis regarding wine that's not seis and it hutu machlali isn't it a kabel chaimer that it should be permitted? Amakra says the pasuk miyayin v'sheicher yazim. From wine, an old wine, he should separate himself. Which, as Taisa points out, those are extra words, as the Gemara said in the first part of Gimel Mabez. We don't need this. We already know this categorical. What's from Yain B'Sheicha Yazim? It was already included from Kol HaYotzim Gefen. Pasuk already mentioned. Why mention Yain B'Sheicha Yazim? It's extra to tell me less a Yain Mitzvah Kiyain Rishos. To tell me that even the Mitzvah wine is going to be as forbidden as voluntary wine. So you see that the There's no hut to machlali. Even a dvar mitzvah is going to be asur. Okay, another question, says the Gemara. The yayin yister es hakol. When you drink wine, it should demolish all the days that you had counted of Nazir. I would tell you, you should have to start over again. Why? Kavachayma tumah. Kavachayma from tumah. What's the kavachayma? Mad tumah shuj mechlalon. If you find by tumah, again, this might get you dizzy, but again, we're going through back and forth, or comparing and contrasting. Just like tumah shuj mechlalon, where you have permissions of the isser, as we said by Meis Mitzvah, and yet so therefore that's a leniency, and still has the chum of success. I call it. It knocks off everything. So yain shlohut machlal, yain that has no permission at all. Lekoshken sheyesa isn't a kavachayim that if you drink it should knock off everything you counted. Says, well, yeah, good kavachayim, but amakrat's a pasuk. It says vayomim arishayim yiplu. The earlier days will fall away. When? Why? Says the pasuk ki tomei nizrei, because he made his nazir's tamei. Oh, what does that mean? Ki tomei nizrei. It tells me tumah seiseres. Only tumah knocks away, because ki tomei nizrei is a miyut to tell me that only when you become tamei. But the drink of wine will not knock it away. So that's how I know that it will not knock it off. Now the Gemara has another question. It says v'hateglachas tisteres hakol. When you take a haircut in the middle of your naziris, it should knock off everything. Not 30 days like we said. Knock off everything. Why? Kavachem b'tumah. What's the kavachema? Umatamif by tumashli osaba matame kimetame. We didn't make that the one who makes the nazir tamei, he doesn't get lashes. A nazir making himself tamei is one of the three yisurim, gets lashes. If you make him tamei, you don't have the same isser as the guy becoming tamei. And so therefore that's leniency. And still still by tum we know that it becomes tamei and knocks off everything. Oh, so by the haircut where they made whoever cuts the hair of the nazir, they made him kimis galech like the nazir himself who gets the haircut, and therefore they both get lashes as we're in the darshan shortly, which is a stringency. Oh, so ain't a din shatist as a call? Isn't it kavachem should knock off everything? Why are we saying only knocks off 30 days? Says the Gemara, no, Amakar, because the pasuk says vayam rishonim yiplu. The first days it will knock off ki tomei nizrei, because he made his naziris tamei, which again we see tumas seseres zakal. We see only tumah knocks off everything, but ve'intaglachas seseres zakal. But the hair cutting does not knock off everything. That we said that's only because it's only knocks off 30 days because we need gidul sar and you don't have that. But we see clearly from the pasuk only tumah is going to knock off everything. But now the Gemara has another question the other way and says, wait a second, v'tumah nasba mitame kimitame. You should say that by tumah, that the one who's mitami the nazir should have the same halacha and the issa and the malchus as the one who's becoming tami, the nazir himself. Why? Kavachayim mitiklachas. Should be kavachayim from the hair cutting. Why? Umatiklachas is regarding the hair cutting. She'enis seseres el shleishim. That haircut only knocks off 30 days. Yet osaba megalech you give it the stringency, even though it's lenient, it has the stringency of that the one who gives the haircut is like the one who's getting the haircut. Oy so Tumish says Sakol Tumah that's more chomer that it knocks off everything. In the din shenazba metame kimetame, shouldn't we say the one who's contaminating is like the nazir who's becoming contaminated? We should have the same issa and the same malchus? Yeah, but Amakra is a pasuk. It says v'time roish nizrei, that is metame the head of his nazirais, which is lametame roish nizrei. It's to one who's contaminating the head of his nazirais. That's the Torah's warning. Meaning, and it's not, but not for someone who's metame the head of a different nazir. It's only roish nizrei, the head of his naziris. But if it's the head of a different nazir, no, then you're not going to be liable. It's an extra miyah to tell me that it's only going to have the isr on the guy who's becoming tummy himself. Okay, says the Gemara, another question. Now we're going backwards. Once we said one way doesn't work, we're going like the other way. So wait a second. Let's say the hair cutting should not make the one who's giving the haircut like the one who's getting the haircut. Why? What's the kavachayma? Tumah knocks off everything. It's very chomer, and yet still has a leniency. As we just said, the one who's because I would learn from Tamarish and Israel, the one who's contaminated is not like the one who's getting contaminated. Not like the nazir doesn't get the same issa. Oh, so teklach is not so chomer. It only knocks at 30 days. Isn't it a kavachayma that you should not make the one who's giving the haircut like the one who's getting the haircut? But I'm across says the pasuk. We have a pasuk that says tar lo yaver al reishay. A razor should not go over his head. Which the Rosh says, that sounds like lo yaver means like at all, whether himself or someone else. Karibe, you read it, lo yaver hu v'lo yaver la'acha. that he should not have it go over, whether it be himself or whether someone else. So you see that the pasuk is clearly telling you that megaleach kemiskaleach, that the one who's giving the haircut like is the one who's getting the haircut, and therefore that's why it's going to have that chumrah. Even though you're right from kavul chumrah, it should not have that chumrah. So the Gemara says, wait a second. The hair cutting should not be categorically permitted, like we said, it's permitted when you're matzayra. It should not be permitted kavul chayim yain, kavul chayim from wine. What's the kavul chayim? If we find by wine that it doesn't demolish at all, doesn't take away any of the days that you counted, and he still has this stringency that you're never allowed to have wine during your naziris, even l'dvar mitzvah. So the klachash is regarding the hair cutting, which it knocks off 30 days. It has that chumrah. In addition to machlala, isn't it a kavul chayim that should have the chumrah that it should not be categorically permitted? The Torah says, yeah, but we have the word roishai. What is roishai? But Amar Rahman also says ziknai, which those are words by the parsha Mitzayra, which we had mentioned this in our previous daf, which that comes to permit if this Mitzayra is a Nazir, that he's allowed to cut off, because we already said all the body of his hair by the Mitzayra. Why are you mentioning roishai? Why are you mentioning ziknai? To tell you that even if he's also a Nazir, who is forbidden to cut off his hair, roishai and ziknai is telling you, depending which mandama, that you go ahead and cut off the hair even in that situation. So you see clearly, yeah, you're right. Kavul chayim should be that categorically should be forbidden from yayin. But the Ma'aseh pasuk says that by Mitzayra, if he's a Nazir, you do cut it off. So that's how we know that you cut it off. So now the Gemara says the other way around. It says, okay, but tegalachas like tistiklal. If you cut the hair, it shouldn't knock off any of the days at all that you counted. Kavul chayim yayin. What's the kavul chayim from wine? Uma yayin if you find by wine. Which there's no permission at all to ever drink wine during your naziris, and still ain't a size. If you did drink the wine, it's not going to knock anything off. Okay, so the kalachash machlala. So hair cutting, which categorical has exemptions, you're allowed to do certain haircuts when you're metzayra, when you're nazir. In addition, like tister, isn't it a kavul chayim that it should not knock off any of the days? Which Taisa points out. It says, wait a second, why won't you say tumah techiach? Tumah will disprove that logic because tumah has hutu machlala. And it is Saisa. So what are you proving from Yayin? Says Taisis, no, you can't prove from anything from Tumah because Tumah says Saisa es hakol. So maybe that's why it has the Chumrah. But regarding Tagalach, it says not Saisa hakol, maybe it shouldn't be Saisa at all from a Kavul Chumrah from Yayin, which is not Hutu Machlala and still has this Chumrah. So it says the Gemara, no, Bina Gidul Sa. What do you mean? It has to knock off 30 days. Because you need the hair growth, v'alaka. So even though you have a kavul chayim that it shouldn't be seiser, but it has to be seiser because you have to do the ceremony of the hair cutting and you don't have any hair to cut off. So that would knock away the kavul chayim simply because you need the gidul sar. But then the Gemara goes the other way where it says, okay, wait a second, but yain yister shleishim yaim. Wine, if you drink, should knock off 30 days. Kavul chayim teglachas. Why? If you find by the hair cutting that there are exemptions categorical that you're allowed to do, like let's say when you're metzayra. Still say seches if you do a haircut in other situations, it knocks off 30 days. Okay, so yain shlohut machal yain, that's more stringent. There's never, ever permissibility of drinking wine. In addition, yesterday isn't the kavul chayim that it should be seiser, which Tosfos wonders. He says, wait a second, by hair cutting, there's a chumrah over there. Maybe that's why there's a chumrah of stira, because you made the megalech kemiskaleach. Whereas by drinking the wine, they didn't make the one who gives the wine. It's very appropriate for our Yom Tov of Purim. The one who gives the wine, like the one who's drinking the wine, doesn't have the same thing. It's shti kados einaynis. You don't have the same halacha. Says Taisus, he says, no, that's part of the Gemara's question. From that reason itself, the Gemara is entertained to say, yeah, the one who gives to drink should be like the one who drinks. But you're right, after the Gemara's answer that says that wine is not seiser, like the halacha is, so then the halacha would be also that you don't make the one that gives the drink to the one who's drinking because it's not seiser. But this is going into the Gemara's question, saying, okay, so it should be the same thing, it should be mashkit k'sheisa. And this is the Gemara, no. You can't bring a kavul chayim from the hair cutting that it's seiser lamed, so yain should be seiser lamed, because the whole reason why you have to have the 30 days when you violate, so to speak, the hair cutting, to have 30 days, not because it's not inherent. It's only simply because you need to have a growth of the hair to do the ceremony. He already has the hair. You don't need 30 days. It's not like a halacha per se. It's just you need technically the hair. You have it if you drink the wine. So therefore the kavul chayim wouldn't be appropriate to make to say it should be seisel lamed by wine, and therefore that's how the Gemara concludes this whole discussion about going back and forth and saying we should have all these kavul chayim. The Gemara says no, we have psukim for them all, or svaras at least, that tell us why the halacha is specifically for each one of these three halachas as they are. which takes us to Amud Beis. The Mishnah continues on this halacha, now going actually regarding the purification process. They're moving on from the 3 isurim during his days in Naziris to when he finishes Naziris and he goes through a purification, but actually this is regarding that of his tumah. So not when he's finished, but let's say he has one of the 3 isurim, he says, to become tummy. Let's say he became tummy. So the Mishnah says, Tiglachas tumah keitzad. So in other words, if a Nazir becomes tummy, how does he do? Just 2 times he does a hair cutting ceremony. One, if he becomes tummy, cuts his hair, starts over. Another one, when he's Nazir is a tahara, which he finished. Now we're talking about that of tumah. So how does he do that? So it says the Mishnah, okay, he sprays himself with the ash waters of the paraduma on day 3 and day 7 of his purification process. He cuts his hair on the 7th day. Or maybe he brings his kabbanis on the 8th day, like Taisus brings. It says explicitly in the parasha. It says he cuts his hair on the day it becomes pure, which is b'yom shvi, and on the day 7 he cuts his hair. He brings his kabbanis on day 8. Okay, but now it says the Mishnah gets a little more complicated. What happens if you didn't do it? You didn't do the hair cutting on day 7. Let's say you only cut your hair on day 8. So it says the Tana, maybe Karbanis by B'yom de Rebbe Kiva. Says, okay, even though generally you cut your day 7, and the day later on day 8 is when you go ahead and bring your Karbanas, here if you only cut your on day 8, you'll also bring your Karbanas B'yom Shmini on day 8. However, on that, Amalei Reb Tafin said to Rebbe Kiva, wait a second. Ma bein zeh, here's where we get a little more complicated till the end of the daf. Ma bein zeh l'mitzayra. What is the difference between this guy, the Nazir Tameh, and the Mitzayra? Meaning, he said to him, I heard from you that by the Parsha Mitzayra, the second hair cutting, meaning he cuts his hair, the Mitzayra, and then he cuts himself again a week later, it says, on the 7th day, Yigalech is called, he has to cut off all his body here, and he washes his garments in water, and he purifies himself, and it says, on the 8th day, he takes 2 lambs, and 1 ewe, etc. So Reb Tarfon says, Rabbi Kiva, I heard from you, by a Mitzayra who doesn't cut his hair on day 7, if he cuts his hair only on day 8, that the halacha is, he brings the karbanos on day 9. So Reb Tarfon's asking, he says, wait a second, Rabbi Kiva, why over here are you telling me that if you cut your hair on day 8, you'll bring your karbanos on day 8 by the Nazir who is purifying himself? I heard from you by Mitzayra, who has the same halachic procedure, but that you told me over there that if you cut your hair on day 8 instead of day 7, you're not going to bring your karbanos on day 8, you're going to bring it on day 9. So what's the difference between the Nazir Tameh and the Mitzayra that seemingly have the same exact halachas, and suddenly in this area you're differentiating? So on that, Amalei Rebbe Kiva gave an answer. He says they have fundamental difference. Why? This one, Tarasei Tluya B'yamav. His purification is dependent on days. Meaning, the Nazir Tameh, after he gets sprayed on day 3 and day 7, he's pure. That's what purifies him. The days purify him. Mitzayra, on the other hand, however, Tarasei Tluya B'taglochasai. His purification depends on the hair cutting. So even though he tabled on day 7, the halacha requires he has to table another time after he cuts his hair, because it's totally in the taglachas. Oh, if that's the case, so then if he's a tful yoim, if so, he's a tful yoim after he cuts his hair, meaning after he cuts his hair, he's a tful yoim, and therefore if he doesn't cut his hair until day 8, he called a tful yoim on day 8. That's not totally pure yet. Usually what happens is on day 7 you table, so great, you're going to be pure, and all you got to do is, okay, you technically got to do the hair cutting, but you could bring your karbanos next day because you're tar already. You did your tefillah yesterday and you had your hair b'shemesh. But over here, no. Here, the days are not enough. You're only going to be purified when you cut your hair. So if you're cutting your hair as a mitzvah on day 8, and then you have to table again, because you can't do it until you have the taglachas, guess what? You're a tefillah today. You can't bring. Veini may be kolban. As the Mishnah. You cannot bring karbanos until you have sundown. Because the Torah is particular that the purification of the Tumah Mitzayra is with the bringing of his karbanos, which, however, he cannot bring his karbanos even to send them unless he is already had Herav Shemesh. But although he told the day before, but that tefillah is nothing for the Mitzayra who requires his taglachas, not just days. So therefore, though they look very similar, the Nazir, Tameh, and the Mitzayra, the one difference is the hair cutting of the Nazir Tameh is more of ceremonial, but regarding that of the Mitzayra is critical for his Tahara. So if you did the hair cutting on only day 8, and then you got to go to mikvah again, guess what? You're Tzvul Yom, you can't bring your Kabbalah. So you got to wait for the next day for day number 9. But Nazir Tameh could do it on that same day, day number 8. That's what Rabbi Kiva said back to Rabbi Tarfon. So the Gemara asked, Kibla minei? Did Rabbi Tarfon accept from Rabbi Kiva his response that we have in the Mishnah that a Nazir that cuts his hair on day 8 could bring his Kabbalah on day 8? Or maybe he said no, just like you said by Mitzvah, you got to wait for the next day to day 9, so to over here. Says about Tashman to bring a raya, the Tani Hill. Hill taught the following brisa. Gilech, if a Nazir Tameh cut his hair bishmini on day 8, maybe karbanaisav b'tishi'i. He brings his karbanas on day number 9, which Atayz points out the Gemara knew that this brisa was said regarding the context of Nazir. And now the question is, who is teaching this brisa? I understand if Reb Tarfon didn't accept from Reb Kiva, you could say who's the Tan of the brisa? Is Reb Tarfon, who holds the same like Mitzvah, he got away for the next day. But if you were thinking to say that he accepted it from Rabbi Kiva, wait a second, then according to everyone, everyone holds you bring it to the end of day 8. Obviously, he didn't accept from Rabbi Kiva. To which Rabbi says, no, not necessarily. Like Kashas, not a difficulty. Why? Because the halacha of our Mishnah is the Tavel B'Shvi. We Taveled on day 7. So like we said, since by Nazir, the Taglachas is not critical for your Tahara, if you Taveled on day 7, as you're supposed to, that although, so to this guy who's cutting his hair on the day 8, although he was supposed to do it on day 7, you can bring your Karbanas on day 8. That's the Mishnah. And Reb Tarfon agreed to that. The brisa that Hill taught was the like Tavel B'Shvi. He didn't Tavel on day 7. Not only did he wait to do his haircut on day 8, he also waited to Tavel until day 8. So the Torah was particular that Nazir has to bring his carbon in the state of Tahara. If it's a Tvul Yom, he can't bring Karbanas, and he needed consent Karbanas. So it's not only that he cut his hair on day 8, he also Tavel on day 8. So you're Tvul Yom. Not because it's like Mitzvah. Mitzvah, even if you Tavel on the day 7, if you cut your hair on day 8, you're still going to be a Tvul Yom. That Reb Tarfon agrees to Rabbi Kiva in the Mishnah. If you Tavel day 7 and you're supposed to cut your hair day 7, you only cut your hair on day 8. That's not ma'akiv. We already had Harav Shemesh from your Tefillah. But here we're talking about the brisa. The Hill brings that if you cut your hair on day 8, you have to wait to day 9. Because not only did he wait to cut his hair on day 8, he also waited to Tavel on day 8. Okay, Tavel on day 8. You're a Tvul Yom. You can't bring Karbanas today. You have to wait for Harav Shemesh, and then you have to wait to day 9. If it doesn't prove anything, could be Reb Tarfon did accept from Rabbi Kiva. Now, relating to this halacha of Tumah, so the Gemara brings a complex discussion. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Ashkechesinu l'chavrei Reb Nosson b'Hoshia, the Yasmin v'Kamer, which really, as just to mention, as we said, that this is really going to be very relevant in the moment. The Beis HaMikdash was split into 2 different areas. As we mentioned in the introduction, there's the Azara, which is the Machna Shechina, it's the highest level of Kedusha. And you have the Har Bayis, which is further out, if you're going concentric circles from the center, from the Beis HaMikdash. You have Har Bayis, which is the Temple Mount, which is the mountain itself, which is Machna Via, that's a lower level of Kedusha. So a Tami Mace is not allowed to enter into the Machna Shechina, but may enter into the Har Bayis to Machna Via, even the mess itself, actually. Moshe Rabbeinu brought Yosef's bones with him, which is Machna Via. A Zav, on the other hand, is not allowed to enter not into Machna Shechina and not into the Har Bayis. Now, the Gemara we're going to discuss right now is going to discuss that of Ziva. Now, regarding Ziva, which is a genital discharge, so if there's 2 emissions of Ziva, which happen 2 times, so you count 7 days and you're immersed in the mikveh. 3 emissions, however, of Ziva adds on 1 more. You have to also bring karbanas on the 8th day. The relevancy of that is going to be what's called the Mechusik Kippurim, which is even though he already had Harav Shemesh, so even though he's not a Tful Yom anymore, if you had 3 emissions, you got to wait for the next day to bring your karbanas. As the pasuk says, "V'sipol shivas yamim," you count 7 days. V'rachatz b'mayim, u'bayomer shmini yikach le'shtei seirim, and this is what's going to be very critical. It says, "U'bolafnei Hashem el Pesach Oyel Moed." That's going to be the discussion. What's the Pesach Oyel Moed that he has to come to on day 8? Remember, he's a Mechusik Kippurim. So we're going to see the discussion if that's what's called Shar Nikoner, which it's the gate that opens up into the Machna Shechina. as we showed by the introduction, it's that in the Ezras Nashim, Shar Nikanor opens up into the Ezras Yisrael, which is the Machne Shchina. So this is where the Gemara is going to come to a discussion right now. So the Abaya, going back to the Gemara, Abaya found the friends of Rav Nosson B'Hoshia. They were sitting, they were saying that it says regarding Zav, and it's actually there in the Parsha Metzora, but it says regarding Zav there in the Parsha Metzora, it says, if, like we said, we quoted the Pasuk, that he was going to purify himself from a ziva, and he's going to count 7 days, he's going to wash his garments, he's going to bathe in pure waters, and he's going to purify himself. And the day 8, he's going to go ahead and he's going to take 2 turtle doves, and the Gemara quotes the Pasuk, Uval lefnei Hashem, he's going to come in front of Hashem, El Pesach Oil Moed, Unisonim El HaKoyin, he's going to give it to the Koyin, and the Koyin is going to atone for him, etc., and he's going to purify himself. Says the friends of Rav Nosson B'Hoshia, wait a second, Emusai Huba, when does this guy come, lifnei Hashem, as we said? Bizman shu tavel, it's if he already taveled, v'asa herav shemesh, and he had sundown on day 7. Oh, then yes, but like tavel v'asa herav shemesh, like you see from the pasuk, you read the pasuk, that's what the pasuk is saying. But if you didn't tavel and do sundown, then you're not allowed to. Now, Taisus brings from, according to the Maravanshberg, it's a Sefri, that says that you would think that you could toivel on that day, on day number 8. Meaning, just to stop at this point, to pause, Taisus is telling us that the friends of Rav Nosson B'Hoshia were saying that when you see from the pasuk is that on day number 8 is, meaning he has to first purify himself, rachatz b'mayim, and then on day 8 he brings his karbanos, and then he comes lefnei Hashem al Pesach al Moed. Because if not for this pasuk, I would have thought that you could tell on day number 8. So therefore you need Tamalim Avol Lefnei Hashem, that it comes in front of Hashem, which that is Shar Nikanor. So how could this person come into Machne Shchina? Only if he taveled from when it was still the day on the 7th day and he had sundown. Which Shlomo says, don't wonder, how is it so obvious for these Tanoim that a Tfulyim of Zav is forbidden to enter into the Machne Leviyah? Because you're saying, how could he come in? Only if you tell him about Yoim. What do you mean? A Tful Yoim of mess is permitted to come into the Machne Leviyah, as the Gemara says shortly. So why are you assuming that you have to tell on day 7 to be Herb Shemesh, to then bring your Karbanos on day number 8 to come to the Shar Nikanor? What do you mean? Shar Nikanor was part of Machne Leviyah. It was the last thing right before going into Machne Shchina, that gate. So how do you know that you have to have Tovel and have Herb Shemesh? Why can't you be a Tful Yom? Why can't you actually do it on day 8 and be Tful Yom the Zav? Just like Tful Yom the Mess is allowed to come in. Says Taisus, no, because the pasuk they understood says Ubolav Ne Hashem B'Yom Shmini. It's saying B'Yom Shmini and then Ubolav Ne Hashem. So the inference is that before day 8 you're not allowed to come in. So they're inferring this from the reading of the pasuk. Okay. Now, that's what the Brisa said. Now, these Chaverim said, obviously you see the following halacha. Obviously you see that Almo Kesavar, obviously he holds Tvul Yom Shel Zav. If a Zav immersed himself that day, Kizav Dami. He has the halacha of a Zav, which, as Tais explains, this is what the friends of Rav Nosson B'Hoshia were saying. Since we see that the Tana holds that the Tful Yom of a Zav is not allowed to go into Machne Levi, which is what the Shar Nikanor is, even though a Tful Yom of Mess or of Sheretz are permitted, obviously because the Tana holds that the Tful Yom of a Zav is like a Zav. And the Nafkamina is regarding that you cannot be Sheikhtin Bezarkin Alav. You cannot slaughter a carbon and spray the carbon for such a person. Now, if he waits and he tavels there for until day 8, okay, he cannot send his carbon because, like we said, you can't be shechting and spraying a carbon for him, as the Gemara brings in the second parak of Kris, Daf Yomi and Aleph, where according to the one who holds Tful Yom Dezav Kizav Dami, ain't Sheikhtin Bezarkin Alav. Which Taisus says, I heard that the reason why we're going to say a Tful Yom is like a Zav, even though all other Tful Yoms we don't say that they're so severe, they're really purified, they just have to wait for sundown, is because by Zav it's Tumah Yotzla Megufay. In contrast, most Tumas you contract from somewhere else. You touch the dead person, you touch a dead sheretz. By Zav it came out of his own body. And even when he has only 2 discharges, which is not even mechutz kippurim, like we said, 2 discharges doesn't require a carbon on day 8. Even over there, he's not allowed to go into Machna Leviyah as a Tvul Yom on day 7 because of Tumah Yitzhak Megufay. That's what they were inferring from this Tana, that Tvul Yom of Zav is like a Zav. This is what Abai overheard. So on that says, Amin Elohei Nano, says Abai, I said to them, wait a second. El Me'at, if that's the case, in other words, according to what you guys unspecifically are saying, you didn't explain from where the Tana proves that the Tvul Yom Zav is forbidden to go into Machna Leviyah, and you guys think that he proved it from the pasuk that says Uvava Yom Shmini that comes on day 8, which the inference is that you have to table on day 7. But if you table on day 8, since you're Tvul Yom, you're not allowed to go in. I have a question for you. Gabi Nazir Tamei Nami. Then regarding also the Nazir who was Tamei, with the pasuk says in Parashas Nasai, by the Nazir Tamei it says that he cuts the hair of his head on the day that he purifies himself. On day 7 he cuts his hair. And then on day 8 he brings his 2 turtle doves or his 2 young pigeons. Where the pasuk says that he brings it El HaKoyin to the Koyin El Pesach El Moed, to the opening of the Oil Moed, and he brings over there his keves, his lamb that's in the first year for an ashram, etc. Are you going to say also over there Emus Ahuba? When could the Nazir Tamei come in? Is Bizman Shetavav Asher Reb Shemesh? Is only when he had toiveled the previous day and he made sundown? But as you continue to talk about Memheim and Aleph, Mechti, let's see, he says. Shari Nikana. This Shari Nikana, which Taisa explains, is the gate of the Ezra's Nashim. Up until that Shari Nikana is Machna Leviyah. As the Gemara says in Psachim, the Pehema based. Shari Nikana was not sanctified, even though it's right there, opens up into the Azara, which is the Machna Shechina. It was not, the gateway itself was not sanctified, the Kedusha Machna Shechina. That's Allah Machna Leviyah. Now, obviously, when it says the Vol Ne Hashem, that you come in front of Hashem, it's Shari Nikana. Because you can't say Lefnei Hashem means literally in the Azara, because he's Mechutz Kapara. And we say shortly that Oitam Asabai, he still has his Tumah, comes to include Mechutz Kapara, that are Chayiv Karas if they come to Machna Shechina. So they come to the Shari Nikana. So wait a second. Heiche Kayamin, where is Shari Nikana considered as which area? B'Shar Leviyah. Okay. Says Gemara Vatanya, we learned in the Brayso that says, Tamei Meis, someone came in contact, he's tummy from a dead person, he's allowed to come into the Machna Leviyah, and not only the guy who became tummy from a dead person, you can bring a dead person into Machna Leviyah, like it says in the pasuk, Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him. What does it mean with him? It means in his partition, which Moshe Rabbeinu was the Levi, with him in Machna Leviyah. So what's the question that Abai is asking? So Taisa explains. He says, wait a second. Just like over there, you cannot infer that until day 8, that it's forbidden to go in, because that's not true, as the Gemara explains. Rather, obviously, when the pasuk says Ubayem Shmini on the 8th day, is come to let us know just the time of when they bring his karbanis, meaning by the Nazir who's Tamei Mace, right? That's what Nazir Tamei is. Became Tamei from it's only by mess. So when you say by the Nazir Tamei, it says the same words. It says that he purifies himself, he cuts his hair, and day 8 he brings his karbanis. Now there says Abaya, you thought you're going to prove from that Tana that he holds that the halacha is, obviously because you have to tell the day before, because the day 8, you have to wait for the day 8, and then only then could you go in. So you say Tvul Yom Dezav Kizav. Not true. I'll bring you from Tamei Mes that it says the same words. On day 8 is when he comes to bring his karban, and there doesn't mean that he couldn't do it before then, because a Tvul Yom of Tamei Mes, even the Tamei Mes himself, and even Mes himself, could come into Sham Nikana, which is Machna Leviyah. So obviously when it says you have to bring your, only then can you bring karban on day 8, doesn't mean that up until then it was forbidden to come to where you're coming to right now. It's just letting us know when you bring the karbanis. And it's not going to say you're not allowed to come to that area beforehand. So says Abai, and by Zav also. Where do you guys get off knowing that the Tana says that you're not allowed to go in before that point in time? Now, Taisa is a little bit difficult because you could say that Pesach Oyel Moyed, what it means to say is Pesach HaHeichel, the opening of the Heichel. Because we find by Shlamim, it says V'shachtu Pesach Oyel Moyed, the Gemara in Zvachim Navnaim Bey says that the doors of the Heichel have to be open. And maybe I'll tell you that no, a Tvul Yom of Mes is forbidden to go in over there, and what's the over there? Maybe that's Machna Shechina. In other words, how do you know? You're trying to disprove the friends of Reb Nosson by saying, what do you mean, I'll prove to you by Tamei Mes? It also says the same words and that's Shar Nikanor, and Shar Nikanor, he could be there beforehand, and obviously when you're saying on only day 8 he could come there, it doesn't mean just to come, that means that's when you bring the Korban. How do you know? Maybe there Lifnei Oil Moed actually means in front of the Heichel. Like you find by Shlomo, that's what it means, and that Itaka can't come in because that's Machna Shechina beforehand. So and that says Tais no, because for that you don't need to have, because to exclude, because it says Tamayiyah, which it includes a Tvul Yom, as we learn that shortly. And every Tvul Yom is not allowed to go into Machna Shechina. So I wouldn't need to tell me that over here by the Mechusik Kippurim. Obviously the Pasuk coming to tell me that the time of bringing the Karbanos on the 8th day, and not before that, and not to say you're not allowed to come in, because it's not told because I knew that you wouldn't be able to come in as a Tvul Yom. So therefore, again, it's going obviously in the Shar Nikanor, and again, therefore that's Abayi's point regarding them. So you could say the same thing over here by the Tvul Yom Dezav. How do you know that saying it's us? Maybe it's just saying when you bring the Karbanos. So Elam Abayi, rather Abayi says, and this is Girsa Taisa has not like our Girsa. Taisa's Girsa says, rather Abayi says Tvul Yom Shazav Lav Kezav Name, not like the Girsa that we have. Tvul Yom of a Zav is not like a Zav, not like the friends of Rav Nosson said. Now, even so, Kiva in the Mechusik Kippara, since he's lacking atonement, loy ayil. In other words, not because like you guys were trying to say Tvul Yom Zav is Kezav. No, he's not like Kezav. But if he's Mechusik Kipparim, like we said about Shalish Re'iyos, so therefore he cannot go in. So even if you're going to say that he holds not Kezav Dami, regarding that, yes, you're allowed to slaughter and spray the Karban to him, but he's not allowed to enter into the Machna Leviyah because he's a Mechusik Kippurim. Again, if he's Baal Sholish Re'iyos, in contrast to Baal Shtei Re'iyos, which is not Mechusik Kippurim. Now, says the Gemara, Viva Machna Leviyah Kai. Now, in other words, that if then he's permitted to come into Machna Leviyah, so my correlate Oil Mayid. Why are you saying it Pesach Oil Mayid? So, says the Gemara, that's not the Pesach Oil Mayid. Says the Gemara, remember, that's to say, it just wants to compare it to the Oil Mayid. Mahasam just like with the Machna Shechina. Mechutzik Kippur Loy Ayil. Someone's lacking atonement, it's not allowed to enter. After the Machna Leviyah, no, so we want to say also Machna Leviyah, right? It's not really Pesach Oil Mayid. We're really further out, Shar Nikanor. But we want to say also Machna Leviyah, not Mechutzik Kippur. Someone's lacking atonement, Loy Ayil is not allowed to go in there. But again, we're not talking about the Tful Yom of Beis Riyas. Someone who has only Shtei Riyas is allowed to enter Machna Leviyah because it's only one step from the complete Tara. If someone who has Shalish Riyas, he's not allowed to enter because he is 2 steps from complete Tara. He's a Mechusik Kippurim. So that's why he's not allowed to enter. But you can't prove me anything of Tful Yom Dezav is Kezav. Could be Lav Kezav. Says the Gemara, V'hasim and Nalan. And over there, by Mechusik Kippurim, they're not allowed to enter into the oil moed to Machna Shechina that you're comparing out to Machna Leviyah. Where do we know that from? Oh, says the Gemara, we learned that in the Brisa. Pasuk says about Midbar, and the Pasuk says whoever touches a mess in the soul of a person that's going to die and he's not going to purify himself, the Mishkan of Hashem is going to make richly impure, he's going to defile it, and that person is going to get cursed because he didn't spray himself with the purifying waters. The Pasuk says, Tameh, he's going to be Tameh. What's Tameh? It's extra words. The Rabbis Tvul Yom, that's going to include the Tvul Yom. And then there's even more words. Oy Tumasavai, he still has his Tameh. What do you mean, still? The Rabbis Mechusik Kippur is coming to include someone's lacking of atonement because the pasuk is telling us that from Oitum Asabai, the Rabbis Mechusik Kippur is that he's not allowed to enter into Machna Shechina. So Taisa just concludes the sugi by saying that Abaya went and responded to the words of the friends of Rav Nosson from the 2 points that they said. They made up on their own svara. They said, obviously the Tana holds Tvul Yom Dezav Kezav Dami. And also a second point, they didn't explain how could they prove Tvul Yom Kezav is Kezav, that it's usher to go into the Pesach al Mayid. So that's as some Girsayis actually have on from the Taser Bein the Parrots, that Abayi was Saisr them on 2 things. First of all, that they said Tvul Yom Dezav Kezav Dami. He says no, it's Lav Kezav Dami. And this that they didn't explain how they're going to prove from the Tana that the Tvul Yom is forbidden to go to Machna Leviyah. He explained that. Where do you know that from? The reason why he cannot go in is because of Mechusik Kippurim. Someone who has 3 tumas that came out of his body. That's one approach as Taisis. And additionally, you could say that a Nazir could go into Machna Shechina because he's not Mechusik Kippurim. He's not considered Mechusik Kippurim, only someone that the tumah comes out from his body, like a Zav. But a Nazir actually could come into Machna Shechina. So therefore, that's just the final point Taisis says regarding this halacha. Thank you to any time for hosting us.